Hello, hello. How's everybody doing? It's been a minute. It's been a minute. Everybody let me know in the chat what you're drinking tonight. I am sipping on a classic here, Newcastle Brown Ale, also known as a Nuki Brown to those across the Atlantic. A classic beer. Kind of dark. My dad actually turned me on to it. It was one of his favorites. Always a staple in my house growing up. Not for me, of course. We got Corona. Little Natty Light. Can't go wrong there. Elijah Craig Bourbon. We got a peanut butter screwball. I think it's probably screwball. Liqueur. With an eye on your fave Buffalo Trace. I actually finished a bottle of Buffalo Trace last night. Got Stella. Got some sparkling water. Elijah Craig Barrel Proof C923. I don't know what that is, but it sounds delicious. Tito's and Sprites. Tito's and Sprite. We got 805. Sour brown ale. We got Pliny the Elder from Mark. Can't go wrong there. Great beer. They actually sell it at my local Whole Foods. Makers on the Rocks. Love that. Don Julio Resposado straight to the head. Good luck. Sierra Nevada, Ballast Point Sculpin. That's a great one. I think I recommended that on a past stream. Sierra Nevada. More Buffalo Trace, Blanton's, Crown Royal, and Coke. We got a kombucha, mezcal. Yeah, screwball. That's what I thought it was, Luke. All right, let some people trickle in here. Don Julio 70 with Fresca. That's basically like Paloma, right? Grapefruit soda and tequila. It's a nice drink, nice and refreshing. Figured I'd go for something a little bit darker tonight. It's raining outside here in Venice. Kind of cold, chilly. Get a little Nuki Brown in the system to warm things up. How's everybody doing? It's been a while. We haven't had one of these streams since, I don't know, maybe training camp. Let some people trickle in here and then we'll get going. Let me know, like, where do you guys want to start here? We can sort of discuss it in the chat while people kind of trickle in. Do we want to talk about what happened? Do we want to talk about what will happen? You guys let me know where your heads are at, and we'll sort of go from there. Obviously, a lot to talk about, but sometimes you guys are sort of in the frame of mind where you're like, past is the past. Let's move forward. So this is your time here. So you guys let me know what you want to do. Before we do get started, let me know in the chat where you want to start. I'll look through and figure out what sort of the consensus is here, if there is one. Before we start, though, any of you people in the stream right now that do not subscribe to The Athletic, as always, got a link below. You can click on and subscribe. This link below is sort of my in-depth breakdown of everything that went wrong during the Brandon Staley, Tom Telesco era. I'm sure some people in the chat have read it already. If you thought it was good, let everybody know. Also on The Athletic right now, if you don't subscribe, I have my full list of GM candidates, 16 candidates that I put together. I have a list of head coaching candidates, 13 candidates on there. All sorts of stuff breaking down what happened, what will happen. So if you do want some more in-depth content from me, click the link below and subscribe to The Athletic. So where do we want to start, guys? And start Thursday night and sort of go from there. Also, people who do subscribe to The Athletic in the Chad, I would appreciate you letting other Chad members know if you appreciate the content. All right, we want to start Thursday night. All right, we'll just unpack. Yeah, we'll just unpack. I want to get to your questions, so I don't want to do too much, but I'll do I guess I'll do like an overview. Start Thursday night and kind of get into it. Yeah, does that sound good to everybody? Okay. So, listen. Chargers are going into Thursday night. They're 5-8. Obviously the season isn't going the way they wanted. Justin suffers the finger injury against the Broncos. They lose that game 24-7. But and I'll be fully honest about this. I did not see that coming. Easton Stick, this is his 5th year with the organization. From everyone that I had talked to, like there was belief in Easton, and it was a huge opportunity for him. And my thought was sort of rooted in that fact. The first start of his NFL career in the regular season, the first time he was starting a non-exhibition football game in like 1,800 days since he was in college in North Dakota State. And because it was a big opportunity for him, I felt like the team was going to rally around him. And I did not get any sense before then that there were fractures. So, from what I've gathered now in about a week since that game went down, it was just a perfect storm of circumstances. You had the 2 turnovers early in that game, the Easton Stick fumble, the Joshua Kelly fumble. All of a sudden, it's 21-0 in the first quarter. And I think the way that game started and how quickly the Raiders put up those points, a lot of stuff that had been boiling under the surface, and some of it had even started to leak towards the surface, it all came flooding out. And what you saw there, in no uncertain terms, was a clear case that Brandon Staley had lost the locker room. And I don't think that's up for debate, frankly. Now, I'm not going to sit here and point fingers and say that, this specific play or that specific play, you can go, if you really want to see it, you can go watch the film. But, it was clear that after that first quarter, as it kept going at halftime, and then even into the second half, that was a team that was fractured. And whatever culture Brandon Staley had been attempting to build there, that was the clear indication to everybody that it had not worked. I think you had a number of players in that locker room and even on that field Thursday night that still believed in Brandon Staley. And you saw it in how they played. At the same time, it is a 53-player active roster. And it only takes, a handful of players for the product to look like that. And so that's basically what I've gathered. Ultimately, it's a results-driven business, and I think, heading into this season, there were very clear expectations as far as what needed to happen this season. I think with some of the moves that they made last offseason, particularly the restructures of Khalil Mack, Joey Bosa, Mike Williams, and Keenan Allen, it was an indication that collectively as a franchise, as an organization, they thought that they had a roster and a building good enough to contend for a Super Bowl. To me, I felt like that was a miscalculation at the time. You can go back and read anything I wrote last offseason about the concerns that I had with the roster. It's in print and it's on the record. Now, I didn't think it was as grave of a miscalculation then as it ended up being. And I think over the course of the season, a lot of the holes in the roster were exposed, whether that was, lack of depth at corner, lack of depth at safety, whether that was, run blocking at tight end. You can sort of go down the list of the things, the concerns that I had about the roster. A lot of that, was exposed. But regardless of what the calculation was, there was an expectation to go and win. And it was the last chance. That was not, it might have not been public. I think I talked about it, on here, and I wrote about it, what the expectations were. I don't know if I ever stated it explicitly, but it was the last chance. Like, they had to go out there and win, or there were going to be changes. And so as the season progressed, even after that Broncos game, 5-8, the playoffs were, out of the question at that point for the most part, for all intents and purposes. I felt like, okay, this was going to happen after the season. It's how ownership typically operates. As you guys, I'm sure, are very aware of by now, like, they hadn't made an in-season coaching move since 1998 with Kevin Gilbride. How they prefer to operate is, and honestly, I think this is a good process. Like, I'll be honest with you, like, wait till the end of the season, regardless of how it's going. That way you have a full sample, and then take the time after the season to really process everything that happened, have discussions, and make the best educated decision that you can. There's a lot of emotion involved over the course of a season, and the last thing you want to do as an organization is make any sort of knee-jerk decision, which I think is smart. And so I think that was still the plan, right? Even after 5-8, even after the Broncos game, even after Justin's injury, that was the plan. I don't think they wanted to do this. But when you get embarrassed like that, and it's so clear that this thing had spiraled out of control to the point where you're down 63-7 to your biggest rival, it's unacceptable. And at that point, there was nothing to gain by keeping anybody around. A lot of this I get into in my article below. If you want, more in depth, like I always say on here, I'm a better writer than I am a talker. In the case of Brandon Staley, I think it was more acute. The things that went wrong were more acute. And what I mean by that is, winning record in 2021, playoffs in 2022. Like, there was a feeling that this thing was still heading in the right direction despite what happened in Jacksonville. I think you had one season here specifically where a lot of his shortcomings were exposed as a coach, particularly as a head coach, because I still think that he is a brilliant defensive coach. I think that he is going to get a job as a defensive coordinator next season. I think he's going to build a good defense and call it good defense. I think it was a case here where just because he was a good coordinator, that didn't translate to all of the responsibilities that come with being a head coach. And they are very, very different responsibilities. You talk to people in locker rooms, outside of locker rooms, like, what they'll tell you is, like, there is a huge, huge jump between what it takes to be a good coordinator and what it takes to be a good head coach. And the traits necessary to do those two things are wildly, wildly different. And I think you saw some of that with Brandon Staley. And so it was really, one season of everything kind of coming to a head and everything unraveling over the course of those 14 games. Whereas with Tom Telesco, obviously the season didn't go how the Chargers wanted it to go. But for him, it was more of a body of work situation where you had 11 seasons in his position and 2 playoff wins. And, I think Tom Telesco is a good talent evaluator. I wrote this, and I genuinely believe that if he does get an opportunity to be a general manager again somewhere else, that he has a chance to find success there. But over the course of those 11 seasons, there just weren't enough results and enough production. And in a results-driven business, it just got to a point where it was clear that there needed to be some new direction here. There needed to be a new culture, starting with that position at general manager, in terms of how they operated, how they went about things, how they acquired talent, how they built the team, how the whole thing operated on a day-to-day basis, how the general manager communicated with people, how what is his personality or her personality, all those different kinds of things, that factors into how a team operates. And over 11 seasons, whatever he was doing as general manager wasn't leading to results. And so I look at them differently, even though this one season and that one game ultimately meant the end of both of their tenures with the Chargers. It felt a little bit different to me in terms of what actually led to it. Tom Telesco's being more of a body of work over 11 seasons, and Staley's being more of everything sort of spiraling, in one season in one 14-game stretch. And so that's basically the overview stuff. I'm happy to dive into questions about what happened. I've been doing a ton of reporting, obviously, the last week. Some of it I can share, some of it I can't. A lot of it is already in the story below and on The Athletic if you want to subscribe there. But if we want to get into some nitty gritty stuff, if we want to get into what this search is going to look like moving forward, I'm happy to do that. So go ahead and throw your questions in. And again, this is your guys' time, so sometimes I can get a little ranty, of course. So I don't want that to happen here, and I want to get into the topics that you guys are really interested in. Okay. What do I think about Bobby Slowik? Obviously what he's done in Houston has been really impressive. His senior offensive assistant is Shane Day, and I think Shane's done a great job along with Bobby Slowik of developing CJ Stroud. They obviously identified that talent with the number 2 overall pick, and he's playing at a really high level. As far as the fit for the Chargers, my only worry there is I think that experience is going to be a key component in this search. Not necessarily, that doesn't mean that they're going to hire a head coach with previous head coaching experience, but I think that can make a candidate more attractive for them because, they tried to go that route with Brandon Staley. And I'm not saying that it's not necessarily apples to apples, right? But there should be some hesitancy on behalf of the organization in looking at a candidate who only has 1 season as a coordinator, at looking at a candidate who's risen quickly. And so that would be the only reason why Bobby Slowik might not make a ton of sense in terms of what they're really looking for, what they feel like they need as an organization, because this is his first year calling plays in Houston. And I think, that lack of experience should, in my opinion, create at least a little bit of hesitancy for the organization, considering how things went with Brandon Staley. With that being said, though, if Adam Peters, for example, is a candidate for GM, he's the assistant GM in San Francisco. If they ultimately go in that direction with the GM hire, GMs are typically going to be considering coaches that they have experience with, and obviously Slowik came from San Francisco before he took the job in Houston. So again, it really depends on how this process all shakes out. But that would be my only concern there is just the level of experience, I think, is going to be a factor in how the Chargers go about this and what they're looking for in terms of sort of that reimagining process and resetting the organization. All right. Haven't seen a lot of, by the way, I'm still coming through clear, right? Because the time and number of people in here and stuff is all kind of frozen. So everyone can hear me okay? Okay, sweet. Haven't seen a lot of talk about Kellen's future. Any thoughts? It's interesting. I thought about it a lot, and and considered it over the last 5 or 6 days. A couple things there. First thing is, Kellen Moore was brought in not exclusively for, but in large part for, fixing a running game that they felt was lacking, in Joe Lombardi's tenure. And the staff as a whole, the team as a whole, has failed to improve in that area. In fact, they've gotten a whole lot worse. And so, when you're looking at it, I don't think it's a situation where Kellen Moore came in and really elevated this group as a whole and did a outstanding job, coordinating the offense. And this entire season sort of falls on the defense, because the reality is a lot of it was the defense, but the offense did not live up to expectations for anyone involved. I certainly thought it was going to be better. And so, issues with the offense specifically, the running game has been atrocious. Some of that is personnel. Obviously losing Corey Linsley after week 3 was a huge part of how the Chargers running game has performed. But at the same time, like pinning it all on losing one player as good as Corey Linsley is, I don't think is fair. I think you saw considerable regression from the offensive line. I don't think they got a lot out of the tight end group that they decided to stick with. I think Austin Eckler's injury factored in, but I don't think you got quality performance from the running backs. And so the fact that the running game was as bad as it was and still is, I think that says something about the job that Kellen Moore did this season. Now, on top of that, I think the Chargers as an organization heading into this search will be looking for a real reset, like a real refresh to what's going on with the organization. I think that is the thought process as they're heading into this. They've used the words reimagining, right? Like they're going to take a really good look at what is going on with the organization, what types of candidates that they are looking at, their interview processes, the structure of the organization, all of that different stuff, and sort of attempt to really turn the page and start over. I think that's the right approach. And so it gives me a little bit of pause to think about the idea of keeping some of the staff, on board when the stated goal of the organization is to, really reset and refresh. And that's nothing necessarily against guys on the staff or Kellen or anybody. It's more about what the organization feels like they need to do to really jumpstart this reset and this reimagining and all of those different types of things. On the other side of the coin, however, if the Chargers do not keep Kellen Moore in any capacity, you're talking about a fourth offensive coordinator for Justin Herbert in 5 years. And I don't care how smart you are, and Justin is smart and certainly capable of learning a new offense every offseason, but you are setting yourself back each offseason if you're forcing your quarterback and all of your players to learn a new offense every single year. So, there are two sides to this thing. Like, in my opinion, I think that you refresh and you reset with the hopes that whoever you hire next is able to establish that continuity around Justin Herbert. But I think there should be some sort of consideration to, establishing continuity, keeping things in place in an effort to, elevate Justin Herbert as much as possible. Now, is there a way to do that without making Kellen Moore the head coach? I think there is. And this is a candidate that's really attractive to me. I think that if people are asking me this over the next couple weeks, like this is the guy that I'm going to keep pointing to. Dan Quinn is really interesting to me. And he checks a lot of these boxes that I'm sort of talking about. Had success with the Falcons as a head coach. Obviously, went to that Super Bowl, blew a 28-3 lead and everything kind of, fell off from there in Atlanta. But you're talking about a guy with head coaching experience. You're talking about a guy that's built the best defense in football over the last 3 seasons in Dallas. You're talking about a guy this season that has dealt with some injuries and been able to, maintain a level of performance. I think that's valuable. I think he brings what they're looking for from a leadership standpoint, from an experience standpoint. And then on top of that, he has experience with Kellen Moore, who was the offensive coordinator in Dallas when Dan Quinn was there, and he's obviously still there as the defensive coordinator. So is there a scenario where they hire Dan Quinn as head coach and they're able to keep Kellen Moore on as offensive coordinator, keep that continuity around Justin Herbert, and go from there? I think that's an interesting scenario. I think that Dan Quinn makes sense even if he doesn't end up keeping Kellen Moore around. But as far as Kellen, there's a bunch of different factors at play. I don't think the performance of the offense has been very good, which is a knock against him. However, at the same time, I think continuity around Justin Herbert and maintaining a set system for him to grow in is also valuable. And so, like, these are all considerations that, the Spanos family will be mulling over here over the next 2, 3, 4 weeks. Right. They're guilty as charged. I'm assuming that's Steven here in the chat. Makes a good point that, Dan Quinn used to be like a Seattle cover 3 guy, and has really like morphed his defensive philosophy, which I think is an indication of his ability to sort of coach to his players, which was something that was missing here over the last 3 years, frankly. I think that the coaching staff, particularly on the defensive side, obviously led by Brandon Staley, had a very specific system that they wanted to run. And I did not think they did a good enough job of molding that scheme to their players and giving their players the ownership of the scheme to go out there and play fast. Like, one thing that I heard over and over and over and over and over again in the locker room is just, it felt like guys were overthinking, and ultimately, like, that's on the coaching staff. Like, the coaching staff, their job is to get their players playing fast and to get their absolute most out of the players. And if your scheme is too complicated, if you're putting too much on your players' plates, and that's leading to these guys not playing the way that they're capable of playing, like, that is an indication of your inability to adjust. And I think what we've seen from Dan Quinn is an ability to do that and change defensive identity to fit his players. Thoughts on Bill Belichick? I still think he can coach. The question is, like, if let's say it happens, right? Like, how much personnel control will he be demanding in his new place? That's what concerns me, because I think Belichick, the coach, is still especially defensively, still a high level coach in that role. Where he has failed, I think, in New England in recent years is as a personnel executive and as a team builder. So if you can, whatever ends up happening with his contract in New England, he's under contract for next year. Like, is he worth trading for? I don't know. But if you do find a solution and you can get Bill Belichick in as your head coach, can you create a structure where he isn't in charge fully of personnel? If that can happen, then he's intriguing to me. But if he's going to demand complete personnel control wherever he is, that gives me pause, because I think he's proven in recent seasons that doing both is not something that he's really capable of doing at this stage of his career. And it's also a question of, like, was he ever really that good at it? Or was it the fact that he had the best quarterback of all time taking significant pay cuts to play in New England? How many of those personnel issues, was Tom Brady solving, right? So again, like, I think what you're going to hear from me in over the course of this stream and in the coming weeks is, like, there are pluses and minuses to every candidate, to every situation. It's really, really hard to get it right. I think the Chargers have shown that. And so, but the reality of it is they have to get it right. They're running a multi-billion-dollar organization that a lot of people, invest their time and energy into, and it's up to them to get this thing right and to make this decision right. And that's really where it's at. Jules says, you called it. We weren't making the playoffs this year. Oh, thanks for bringing that up. Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. Because last time I said that on here, I had a lot of people in the chat telling me, oh, you don't know what you're talking about. How could you say that? You're an idiot. That's how I imagine all of you talk. No, I love you all. I'm kidding. But yeah, I did say that, and I was right. I'm confused. What's the deal with the everyone's talking about the Kellen Moore press conference? I didn't think anything of it. What happened? I was there. Nobody? Was that just one comment? Oh, the end of it when I asked him if he. Oh. When I asked him about if someone had approached him about the interim job. Yeah, he said, I asked him and he said no. It was a very normal exchange. I didn't think anything of it. How would I feel about Mike Tomlin if he was available? I'd feel good about Mike Tomlin. That's exactly the type of guy that I feel like the Chargers need. Just experienced leader. Like that's the best way I can frame it is like that's what they need. They need an experienced leader. That's what I need. Or that's what they need. I don't need that. I mean, I could probably use an experienced leader now that I think about it, but different walks of life. Okay. I saw a question about cap situation. I'm gonna dive into all that kind of after the season. I don't know if it'll be before the GM's hired, after the GM's hired. But yeah, it's messy. It's messy. I mean, they're 40 plus million over the cap for next season. They have outs. Like the only way I see this sort of going down here is, they're going to have to cut a number of these veterans or trade a number of these veterans. And they're going to have to wear like a really, really big dead money charge next year just to kind of reset the roster. Now, who those veterans are, they have options. It just kind of depends on who they hire for GM and what that GM thinks of these players and how much he thinks or she thinks they have left. But I think this whole idea that like, oh, the Chargers have like a veteran roster and like whatever coach comes in is going to have this, nucleus of talent to build around. Like that's not the case. Like the way the cap situation is right now, like this current iteration of the roster can't exist next season. And so like whoever's coming in will have Justin Herbert and they will have, a franchise left tackle on a rookie contract in Rashawn Slater. But outside of that, it's like there's not a lot that's set in stone because they have to get under the cap. And I think the best way to move forward from a cap perspective and roster building perspective is take your lumps in 2024, cut the roster down as much as you possibly can, suffer through a season with, 50, 60, $70 million in dead money. And, it sucks for the Chargers because effectively they're going to have to waste a prime season of Justin Herbert. But that's the only way to then build it sustainably moving forward and to have the freedom for the next regime to really build this thing the way that they want to. So it's not good. It's the reason why, like, I was thinking about different possibilities last year as far as giving themselves cap flexibility moving forward. I threw out Keenan Allen as a possibility. That was nothing against what I thought of Keenan Allen as a player. It was strictly about, what the cap situation was going to look like in 2024. What they decided to do was go all in, kick the can down the road, and worry about 2024 when they got there, thinking that if it didn't go down this year, they weren't going to be here anyway. And that's ultimately what ended up happening. That hasn't changed the gravity of the 2024 cap situation. Like it's not good. And they already have $20 million in dead money that they're wearing for JC Jackson. And so they're getting zero production out of that 20 million. And that number is going to increase here because, in the off season, because they're going to have to make decisions here to clear cap. And the best way to do this is to just rip the Band-Aid off and tear it down, wear your dead money next season. Hope Justin Herbert is, MVP level and can keep you competitive. And then, really start building this thing in the, after the 2024 season, so the 2025 offseason. Yeah, and guilty as charged, again, bringing up a good point there. Like you can extend these guys as well to create room. But again, like some of these players you're talking about, Mike Williams, Khalil Mack, Joey Bosa, Keenan Allen, like if you're extending a player at 32, then you're paying through his age 35 season in Keenan's case. And, one thing you have to do as an organization is always pay for, future performance and not for previous performance. That was a big tenet of Tom Telesco's philosophy, and it's something that I agree with. What else we got? Are we overrating Tuli? No. I don't know about you guys. Tuli is going to be a really, really good player, it's kind of commonplace for rookies at this stage of the season to, fall off a little bit. Very few rookies in the history of the league have been able to really keep it up because this is already well past when the college season typically ends. And so there is an adjustment period there. But from what he showed in those first, 12 games, 13 games, like he's obviously a legit piece. So so you have Herbert, you have a franchise left tackle on a rookie contract. You also have like what should be at bare minimum like a very good starter at edge rusher in Tuli Tuipulotu and on a rookie contract as well, with the potential to be like an elite player. Do I think they extend Kenneth Murray? So that's one of the biggest, repercussions and ramifications of this whole thing is that there's no way now to predict who stays and who goes among, existing veteran players and among, guys that are set to be free agents, Austin Eckler, Kenneth Murray, Alohi Gilman. Like, what's going to happen is they're going to hire a new GM and a new head coach. That GM and head coach are going to go watch the film on every player in the roster, and they're going to come to a decision on every single one of them about whether they can help the team moving forward, whether they fit into the new vision, all that different kind of stuff. So there's no way to predict any of that stuff right now. That's all going to depend on who they hire at GM, who they hire at head coach, and then what those two people think of the players in the roster once they evaluate the film. Thoughts on Derwin's future? It's been weird this year. It has been weird this year. Let me just pull up his contract real quick. So obviously they signed that extension during training camp last year. Derwin's going to be here. I mean, at least through next season. And so I think the way his contract is set up, I think that he's going to be a piece that the new GM and head coach are going to have to work with. I still think Derwin James is a fantastic player. Ultimately, I think what happened with Derwin this season is, Brandon Staley obviously had this vision for how to use Derwin. And the vision was to use him in a lot of different positions. And he is capable of playing in all of those places. He can cover receivers and tight ends and running backs one-on-one. He can play in the deep half of the field. He can play in the post. He can play the run. He can play in the box. He can play as an edge rusher. He can blitz from depth. He can blitz from the line of scrimmage. All of these things are in his skill set. But in my opinion, I think the coaching staff was asking him to do way too much on a snap to snap basis instead of sort of consolidating that role to allow him to play fast. You had these certain possessions where, he's playing slot corner on one snap, and then the next snap he's being asked to play, quarters, and then the next snap as a safety, and then as the next snap he's being asked to play cover two safety, and then the next snap he's, at on the edge blitzing, and then on the next snap they're in dime and he's playing more of a linebacker role, and it's like, even the most talented players, like, when you're asking him to do all of those different things and asking them to know all of these different responsibilities within all of those different roles, like, it's going to detract from their productivity. And that's what I think happened this year. I think that the vision was commendable because you're trying to, get the absolute most out of this supremely talented player. And they felt like that was the best way to do it, was to play him all over the field and use him as this chess piece in an attempt to, like, create confusion. Like, opposing offensive coaches talked about that, how, like, a big challenge of playing the defense was trying to find Derwin on every snap, but was he playing his best football over these 3 years? I don't think so. And this year, I think you saw a player making the kind of mistakes that, I hadn't really seen him make before, like, he wasn't as reliable of a player, particularly in the deep part of the field, as he's been in his career. And so, the issue is, the contract that they signed him to, he has to be that, for that contract to make sense. If he is if you do consolidate that role and he's only doing a few things for you defensively, like, is he worth, $20 million? That's what his cap hit is next year, 19.8, 23.8 in 2025, according to Over the Cap. Like, his versatility as a player and what he meant to the defense was built into the value of the contract. And so, what does his future hold? I think he'll be on the roster next year. I think the contract sort of dictates that. And, I think whoever comes in here next to call the defense is going to have a really good player, and it's going to be up to that coach to figure out the best way to use him. I think, I don't think they should, shrink his role entirely where he's just playing one position. He obviously can do a lot of different things, but I think you have to prioritize, okay, these are the three best things that Derwin does, whatever that is, and, really let him play fast within those roles as opposed to putting so much on his plate. Even, last season, he was doing all of those different things and calling the defense, right? And so, like, I think that was part of it. They eventually took the green dot away from Derwin and gave it to initially Eric Kendricks and then to Kenneth Murray. And Drew Tranquil was doing it for most of last season when they took it away from Derwin. They were just asking so very much of him. And I don't think you got the best version of Derwin James with how they were using him and how much they were putting on his plate. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So see a chat in there for a message from Guilty as Charged that they can restructure Derwin and free up 7.5. So restructuring is just moving money to future seasons. I don't see that as a possibility. They really should not be restructuring contracts. They should be trying to, save immediate cap and then, like, wear as much dead money next season as possible, and then try and give yourself a flexible cap situation moving forward. Like, restructuring just makes you less flexible because effectively what you're doing is taking base salary, turning into signing bonus, and then, moving some of that converted signing bonus into future seasons. And so, I just don't think, like, where they are, it's like makes a ton of sense. Like, I think you need to get out of as many of these contracts as possible. Not saying they're going to get out of the Derwin contract, but I'm just saying, like, you need to take your lumps financially from a cap standpoint and get to a point where you're flexible again. Restructuring would decrease your flexibility. Just sounds like a bunch of excuses. Not sure why Derwin deserves the benefit of the doubt. Yeah, okay. I think that's fair. A fair criticism. My intent there was not to take any of the blame off of Derwin. I don't think he's played his best football this season. I thought. No, I think I was tweeting about it. Where were we? Was that Kansas City, like week 6? I thought he'd been okay up until that point. I was expecting him to improve, and it just kind of has stayed in that space. So, like, sure. Some of it falls on the player as well, but like I think what I'm trying to explain here is like, okay, you guys have all seen what type of player Derwin is capable of being. Why isn't he at that place? And I think like you can't have that conversation without having the conversation of how he was used in the scheme, if that makes sense. But some of the criticism should fall on the player as well. Like if the player isn't performing, like that's there's obviously multiple factors that go into it. Some of it is coaching, some of it is how he's used, and some of it is the player himself. Absolutely. So I didn't want to make that seem like I was absolving him. So again, a lot of questions on Corey Linsley. Like I'm not gonna really talk about that. I want to give Corey his privacy while he deals with this. Obviously Brandon Staley said earlier this season that he's not expecting him to play, and I'm sure that the Chargers and Corey Linsley will be evaluating his future after the season, and you guys will find out when that happens. But I'm not going to sit here and speculate about it. I hope you can understand that. If a player does retire, how does that work out cap-wise? I believe what happens if a player willfully retires is whatever base salary is left on his contract is void, and then if there's any prorated signing bonus, that would stay on as dead money. I don't know that for sure though, so please do not quote me on that. I'm looking at his contract right now. So yeah, he has prorated signing bonus through 2025 next season. This is all according to Over the Cap. He has 11.5 in base salary in 2024, 12 in 2025. That's not guaranteed salary. I believe that if a player retires, that base salary would void, and then the Chargers would be on the hook for 2.6 in prorated signing bonus per season, which would come out to like a $5.2 million dead money charge. But that's my belief. I'll get into a lot of this stuff as we get more into the offseason, and obviously, like, again, I don't really want to do much speculating on Corey Linsley's future, because I kind of want to just allow him to have his privacy and figure this situation out for himself and for what's best for himself and his obviously his family as well. Just had twins earlier this year. Where's the spiked eggnog? Did I do a spiked eggnog on a stream last year? I haven't gone and gotten the eggnog. It's not very good for you, and I'm doing my best to avoid things like that right now. I'm not happy about it. Trying to get things tight for the wedding. It's not going well. John Spanos, what is his role and how might it change as they reimagine their process? So I would suggest if people have questions about this specific thing, I wrote about it on The Athletic. So click the link below and subscribe. It's the latest story I wrote on Monday. We got to sit down, me and a couple of the other beat writers got to sit down with John Spanos and sort of talk through all of this stuff. And so I kind of dove into that in there. The Cliff Notes version is, John Spanos said specifically that, his vision and the philosophy of the family is to hire good people and let them do their jobs. I think that's the correct approach. The question is, like, has that been the reality? In recent seasons over the last 10 years, however you want to frame it. I don't know the answer to that question. I don't know how many people can answer that, to be honest. What I do know is that, I think that aspect of it what is ownership's role in the day-to-day operations of the football team and the football operations side of things. Like, in my opinion, that should be part of this whole reassessment of the organization. How involved is ownership in personnel decisions? How involved is ownership on a day-to-day basis? How often is ownership communicating with the GM, with the head coach? All of those things, should be analyzed, because, whatever's been happening with the Chargers has not been working. And there obviously needs to be a new direction here in terms of how everything is operating, because the results haven't been there for the organization. What I will say is they have invested financially. Like, I went back and I took the numbers off of Spotrac, and they are 7th in cash spending over the last 2 seasons. They've spent, $40 million more dollars in cash than the Rams have spent over the last 2 seasons, for example. They've invested in personnel. They're building a brand new practice facility in El Segundo, state-of-the-art facility. They're investing in the football team. They're investing in the organization. Like, that's unequivocal. What the big test now is, okay, will they invest now in this coaching and GM search? Because the salary cap dictates to a degree how much teams can spend on players. There is no salary cap for coaches, and there is no salary cap for front office. There is no salary cap or limitations on how big of an operation you can build, how much you spend on those specific people. And so that is where, wealthy teams with a lot of cash flow can create an advantage. If they have the ability to go out and spend $20 to $25 million a year on a coach. I asked John Spanos that. Is that on the table? $20 to $25 million on a coach? And he said, we have not had any internal discussions about any sort of maximum salary for coaches. So that stuff's all on the record. I think we're going to find out here in the next 2, 3, 4 weeks, if that's actually true, depending on who they hire, and, how competitive that candidate was, how many options that candidate had, all of those different types of things. But I don't, especially over these last 3 years, I don't get the sense that there was a ton of meddling happening from ownership. Like, these 3 years, this iteration of the roster, to me, felt like it was a Brandon Staley driven roster. I've written about it before. A lot of these draft picks, a lot of these signings, trades, had Brandon Staley's fingerprints all over them. Whether you talk about the Khalil Mack trade, whether you talk about the J.C. Jackson signing, in a lot of ways, it felt like Brandon was driving a lot of this. And so ultimately, like, he bears some blame, but at the same time, Tom Telesco, as the GM, was making these final decisions as the head personnel decision maker. And so I think, like, ultimately, like, they built a roster, and it failed. And I think ultimately, like, that's why you saw both of them get fired last week. All right, I'm done with my beer. So I'll take one more question. All right, what happened to the O-line? It's a good question. I don't know if I have a good answer to that, to be honest. I think, there's a number of different factors. I think, losing Corey Linsley was monumental. I mean, that you got to start there in terms of the level of play around him. I think Rashawn Slater was dealing with some rather significant injuries earlier in the season. He got healthy and was playing better ball recently, but early on, I would say first probably 7 to 8 weeks of the season, he first suffered an ankle injury in week 3. Like, that stretch, like 3 to 8, he really just wasn't himself. I think that had an impact, because when you have him playing elite ball at left tackle, that changes things. Zion Johnson, I don't think, reached the level that they were expecting moving back to his natural position at left guard. When you spend a first round pick on a guard, like that pick really has to hit from a positional value standpoint. And he hasn't been that level of player. I think particularly, in pass protection, I just saw a player that at times was overthinking and, he was prone to these, rather immediate losses. It's one thing if you're getting beat. It's another thing to, lose quickly. And that at that position specifically, like when you're losing right off the ball at guard, that's immediate pressure up the middle, and that's going to disrupt things. I think you got uneven play from Jamari Salyer. I think Trey Pipkins isn't at the level that he played last season, even though he was dealing with an MCL sprain. Why was there regression from all of these players? I don't know if I have the answer to that. I don't know if the players have the answer to that. I know it happened. One thing that I can say is, as much as you guys hated Joe Lombardi, he was really good and really consistent at building a good protection plan, particularly in known passing situations. And that was, having extra protectors in there, creating a plan for when to slide, and how to pick up blitzes and how to deal with different pressure packages. Like he was very consistent in building that plan every week. And he wasn't a former offensive lineman. Like, I think they missed some of that this year. And there is, a knock on Kellen Moore as far as his ability to build protection plans, particularly in late game situations. Like he's very gettable with some of these blitzes. And so you had a drop off in terms of the consistency of the protection plan from a preparation standpoint. On top of that, you lose your center, who's one of the smartest players in the league, who probably could have covered up some of those issues that happened when you had that drop off. You had some injuries thrown in there to the guys that were on the field. And then you also kind of mixed things up to a point where you moved Zion from right guard to left guard, and you put Jamari Salyer in a position he wasn't particularly comfortable with because he played mostly tackle in college. And then you saw a lot of issues in terms of being able to pass off stunts. Like that was a kind of an issue that persisted throughout the whole year because you had players that were unfamiliar with each other. The timing was off on a lot of, and how they passed a lot of these stunts off. And stunts, we're talking about guys just twisting, end coming to the inside, a tackle going to the outside, all of those different types of twists in order to create confusion and disguise on the interior and on the edge. They really struggle in that area. And I think, continuity and cohesion and a familiarity, like I think some of that was missing, and I think some of that bled over to the run game as well. But when I look at the run game, like I did not think that, I think losing Corey Linsley was a big part of it. But to me, like I did not feel like the offensive line as a group was blocking as poorly as the numbers showed as far as the Chargers as a running team. Like I will go to my grave saying this, like they needed more at run blocking at tight end. Like that was obvious last season. I was banging the table for it all off season, and they added nothing to that group. And it was the biggest weakness on the offensive side of the ball. Like they could not block at tight end. And a lot of these plays that were getting blown up were a direct result of tight ends losing at the point of attack. And so, long way of saying, like, it's a 7-word question. What happened to the O-line? 6. And it's, I could talk about it for probably hours, because there's just so much that goes into it. But what did happen is they played worse, and that's just the reality of the situation. So, all right. I think we'll end it there. I appreciate everybody for joining. Again, if you do not subscribe to The Athletic, click that link below. This is my whole deep dive into what went wrong during the Brandon Staley, Tom Telesco era. A lot of good stuff in there that I've sort of collected, over, my entire time covering this iteration of the Chargers. So I really appreciate it. If you like these streams, if you like what I'm saying here, my writing is a lot better, I promise. So, and again, tons of content on my page at The Athletic right now. GM candidates, head coaching candidates, lots more to come in the coming week. So if you want to be locked in during this head coach and GM search, I would highly suggest that you subscribe to The Athletic. Click the link below. Chad, subscribers in the Chad, let those people that aren't subscribed yet know that whatever you think about it. Think it sucks? Be honest with them. I don't care. All press is good press, I think. Right? All right. Appreciate you all. Have a good night. Peace out.